morning to you all, and thank you for joining us on this very special Wednesday, the April 15th, also a general election day here in South Korea. Coming to you live from Seoul, I'm Shin Min. Now, South Korea's general election for the 300 seats at the National Assembly kicked off earlier this morning. Amid the COVID-19 outbreak, election authorities have installed mandatory quarantine measures at polling stations to prevent further infections. For more on this, we're going to go live to our Kan Hyung-woo standing by at one of the polling stations in central Seoul. So, Hyung-woo, just give us a picture of what it's like at the station that you're in.
Hi, Tim. South Korean voters began casting their ballots at 6 a.m. this morning. Some of them were even lining up before the polling stations opened. Now, the coronavirus outbreak still lingering in the country, the National Election Commission has prepared a number of preventive measures against the possible spread of COVID-19. Along with bringing an identification card, voters must wear a mask when going to a polling station. Once voters arrive, they get their temperatures taken. If they don't have a fever or a cough, they need to disinfect their hands with hand sanitizer and put on disposable plastic gloves, both of which are provided by the election officials. Now this year, a fingerprint or scanner won't be used due to concerns it could spread the virus. Instead, voters will sign their digital signatures. Voters are also required to stand at least 1 meter apart from each other at all times. Anyone showing respiratory symptoms or a temperature higher than 37.5 degrees Celsius will be escorted to a separate area to vote. The polling stations will stay open until 6 p.m.
So now, Hyung-woo, what about those in self-quarantine? The National Election Commission has previously made it possible for them to also cast their ballots. Tell us how it works.
That's right, Sam. The election authorities have allowed those in self-quarantine to cast their ballots. There are almost 60,000 people eligible to vote in self-quarantine. According to Ministry of the Interior and Safety, around 23%, that's about of the voters in self-quarantine, some 13,000 people have applied to cast their ballots on Wednesday. Now here are the rules for the voters under self-quarantine. The quarantine will be temporarily lifted from 5:20 p.m. to 7 p.m. Only then can those in self-quarantine head straight to polling stations on foot or in their own cars. Their voting period is from 6 to 7 p.m. after the other voters are finished. Most of those under quarantine will be accompanied by government officials, but those who aren't will be tracked through a mobile application at all times. And of course, they must wear masks. Given that the self-quarantine voters will cast their ballots after 6 p.m., the exit poll will be released at 6:15 p.m. That's all I have for now. Back to you, Samin.
Thank you for those updates. Our Kan Hyung was standing by at one of the local polling stations in central Seoul. And now we take things to the National Election Commission for more on how the voting process is faring on this very election day. And for that, we go live to our Lee Kyung-eun standing by at the NEC for the voter turnout just 4 hours into the election. So Kyung-eun, what's the latest?
Hi, Simon. So much attention is on the voter turnout because the election is being held amid the coronavirus outbreak. And the National Election Commission here is keeping track of the numbers on a real-time basis. And as of 9 a.m., the figure is standing at 8%. That's about 0.9 percentage points higher than at the same time than from the previous election. The southeastern city of Daegu is a key area of attention because it was hit hardest by the COVID-19 in South Korea. And traditionally, Daegu's turnout has been low, and its figure was actually the country's lowest in the previous election. But interestingly, the city is seeing the highest participation with 8.9%. It seems like COVID-19 has further drawn people closer to politics, not away from it. And the polling stations will close at 6 p.m., but the official final turnout will not be announced until the very late at night. And the total number of the voters is expected to see a notable jump at 1 p.m. as early voter turnout will be incorporated in these figures. In all 5 previous general elections, only once in 2002 has the country seen a turnout over 60%. And this year, despite concerns over the outbreak, the early voter turnout hit a record high of 26.7%. I'll keep you updated on the numbers as the day goes on. Semin?
Thank you, our Lee Kyung-eun at National Election Commission. And as we just heard from our reporters on the ground, the general election here in South Korea is well underway with extra caution taken during the COVID-19 pandemic. And South Korea becomes the first country in the world to hold major elections amid the pandemic. And today's event could even set a prime example of how to hold elections safely and effectively. Our Kim Da-mi tells us more.
By holding an election during a pandemic, South Korea will become a global role model. This is in the eyes of several prominent foreign media outlets, which highlight South Korea as being the first major democracy to proceed with an election at the height of a global crisis. By not causing a spike in coronavirus infections, Time magazine pointed out that Korea's approach to this election may provide a roadmap for other countries, such as for the U.S. November 3rd election. At least 47 countries around the world, including the UK and France, have had to postpone elections due to the COVID-19 crisis. But the Telegraph speculates that others will soon follow South Korea's lead. The Guardian has praised for the way in which Korea has prioritized safety and sanitation, especially with the mechanics of voting. In addition to disinfecting all 14,000 polling stations nationwide, the National Election Commission will check every single voter's temperature and provide them disposable gloves. CNN warns of the risks involved when holding an election during a time like this, such as experiencing a low turnout and undermining democracy. However, it also points out that postponing can also be tricky because elections are necessary to maintain public trust and the legitimacy of lawmaking. Kim Da-mi, Arirang News.
A bombshell development from the White House. U.S. President Donald Trump has revealed Washington will halt its funding to the WHO, the World Health Organization, while it reviews the agency's response to the COVID-19 pandemic. During his daily coronavirus press briefing on Tuesday, President Trump said the WHO, quote, failed in its basic duty and it must be held accountable for causing the huge number of deaths. He also slammed the WHO for putting political correctness above saving lives, taking China's assurances about the virus at face value, and opposing travel restrictions from China and other nations early in the outbreak. The U.S. pumps up to $500 million into the WHO's coffers annually. COVID-19 continues to grip the world, with global infections edging toward 2 million. The pandemic is surging in the U.S., Britain, and France, causing the authorities there to tighten up public measures. But some other countries appear to be getting back on track. Our Oh Soo-young tells us more.
Nearly 2 million people worldwide have been infected with COVID-19. Data from Johns Hopkins University as of Tuesday U.S. time shows over 1.9 million people have been diagnosed with the virus, and the death toll has surpassed 119,000. The US has at least 594,000 cases and some 25,000 deaths. The state of New York alone has more infections than any country in the world, with over 106,000 patients. The situation in Europe is mixed. The first countries to bear the brunt of the virus, Italy, Spain and Austria, are allowing some non-essential workers to go back to work, as they have seen their new infection cases fall. On Tuesday, Italy saw fewer than 3,000 new cases for the first time in a month. But the pandemic has worsened in the UK, where as of Tuesday evening local time, the death toll increased by 778, topping 12,000. France also saw a similar number of daily deaths and became the fourth country after the US, Spain and Italy to record more than 15,000 fatalities. Britain and France are expected to keep their lockdowns in place until next month. In India, the country's Prime Minister Narendra Modi extended the world's largest lockdown of 1.3 billion people until May 3rd as cases continue to grow. Meanwhile, Russia on Tuesday recorded over 2,700 new infections, bringing the total case count there to more than 21,000. Authorities in Moscow are also upping measures to flatten the curve, issuing QR codes this week that permit citizens to move around the city. Oh Soo-young, Arirang News.
The Great Lockdown. That's how the International Monetary Fund is describing the current state of the global economy, which it warned is on track for its sharpest downturn in nearly a century. And for the first time since the global depression, it says all advanced, emerging and developing countries are going to enter recession. Our Kim Hyo-sun with more.
The global economy is expected to shrink 3% this year as the international community fights the COVID-19 pandemic. That's according to the IMF, which explained Tuesday that this will be the steepest downturn since the Great Depression of the 1930s.
So now, under the assumption that the pandemic and required containment peaks in the second quarter in most countries in the world and then recedes in the second half of this year, we are projecting global growth in 2020 to fall to minus 3%. Now, this is a downgrade of 6.3 percentage points from January 2020, a major revision over a very short period of time. This makes the Great Lockdown the worst recession since the Great Depression and far worse than the global financial crises.
The IMF also explained that the cumulative loss of global GDP from the pandemic over the course of 2020 and 2021 could amount to $9 trillion, greater than the economies of Japan and Germany combined. Describing the current situation as, quote, the Great Lockdown, the IMF added that both developed and developing countries will face economic difficulties.
So for the first time since the Great Depression, both advanced economies and emerging and developing economies are in recession. For 2020, growth in advanced economies is projected at minus 6%. Emerging market and developing economies, which typically have normal growth levels well above advanced economies, are also projected to have negative growth of minus 1% and minus 2.2% if you exclude China.
The IMF also slashed South Korea's economic outlook for this year to minus 1.2% after an initial prediction of 2% growth last October. The organization expects the global economy to rebound in 2021 with 5.8% growth, but it acknowledges that prospects for next year are clouded by uncertainty as of now. Kim Hyo-sun, Arirang News.
Over in the U.S., former President Barack Obama has officially endorsed Joe Biden for president and is urging Democrats to unite with Biden to defeat President Trump. In a video clip posted on the Biden campaign's YouTube channel on Tuesday, Obama described his former Vice President Biden as the candidate with the leadership and experience to guide the U.S. through one of its darkest times.
That's why I'm so proud to endorse Joe Biden for President of the United States. Choosing Joe to be my Vice President was one of the best decisions I ever made. And I believe Joe has all the qualities we need in a president right now.
Obama also directly criticized his successor, President Trump, without mentioning him by his name. The endorsement reunites the former running mates and comes just a day after Senator Bernie Sanders offered Biden his support. And now to the latest on North Korea's firing of several short-range missiles on Tuesday. Washington's top military general said he does not see North Korea's latest missile test as, quote, particularly provocative. Speaking at a Pentagon briefing on Tuesday, Joint Chiefs of Staff Chairman General Mark Milley said the assessment of the missile firing is mixed and added that the move could have been, quote, tied to some celebrations happening inside North Korea as opposed to any deliberate provocation against the U.S. The State Department said it will also continue to call on the regime to avoid provocations, abide by the UN Security Council resolution obligations, and return to negotiations for complete denuclearization. The regime's latest provocation comes on the eve of late North Korean founder Kim Il-sung's birthday and South Korea's general elections.
Good morning. The weather will not be much of a hindrance when you head to the polls today. It's going to be even warmer than yesterday under mostly sunny skies and no rain. Single-digit lows will jump to the 20s in most parts of the country. And the dryness in the air remains with a dry weather advisory expanding to more regions, while those of us in the central and western regions will need to be aware of relatively bad fine dust levels. The spring warming trend will hit its peak tomorrow at 25 degrees Celsius here in the capital, while nationwide rain on Friday will ease the dryness in the air but will also push down the highs sharply. That's Korea for you, and here's the international weather for views around the globe.
And that does it for us at this hour, but stay tuned to Arirang News for more of your day's headlines as well as the latest updates on South Korea's 2020 general election. Next lineup coming up at noon Korea time, so do join us again then. Thank you for watching and goodbye.